Hi, Chris. Welcome to the Ideas Lab Podcast.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
Now, you are the author of Less Perfect. I've forgotten the name of the book now, which is talking.
More happy.
More happy. But you see, let's keep this in because there you go. I'm less perfect, more happy. And is there a subtitle in there?
No, there isn't really. Apart from Richard Curtis gave me a nice quote for the cover.
The Almost Perfect Book About the Impossibility of Perfection by Richard Curtis, CBE, who's someone you've worked with for quite some time. And
yeah,
let's make this the least perfect podcast ever. So we'll keep in the fact that I forgot the name of your damn
I'm just
book.
off to the toilet then, John.
What's that?
I'm just off to the toilet.
yeah, but that should do it. As long as you don't take the camera with you like somebody did recently on a Zoom meeting. Yeah, so perfectionism is a really hot topic. Whenever I talk about it on my courses, people really relate to it. And it does get in the way. I think it's a massive block for people, getting in the way of getting things done, putting things out into the world. Anyone who wants to do stuff on social media around their own personal brand or around their business, perfectionism is what stops them. I think perfectionism stops us starting a business. It's what I've been writing about for 10 years in my books, at least as part of the main theme. But when you talk about perfectionism, you're actually talking about a clinical condition. Is that right? I mean, when you talk about perfectionism, what do you mean?
Yeah, and that was the biggest question and the biggest thing to try and get over from the start, because a lot of people still see perfectionism as a positive trait. And so how was I to present that it wasn't? And so I'll go back, I came into it because I achieved lots and I knew I was a perfectionist at work, but I also knew I'd split up with my wife twice and argued, even though we had 3 or 4 kids, couldn't stop arguing about the same things. And I knew that my whole life was driven by trying to prove to my dad I was good enough, but I never related those 3 things together. And actually there was an epiphany moment when I discovered OCPD, which is obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which actually the World Economic Forum actually first came out, and WHO said this is the biggest sort of unknown mental health disorder that we have in the world, and it's actually now affecting a substantial number of young people. So so when I say perfectionism, I'm not talking about there being anything wrong with making something perfect. If you think you're going to enjoy the journey to making something perfect, or you're going to enjoy the rewards of it, you can enjoy writing a book and you want it to be perfect, and you're going to enjoy the rewards of seeing it published. There's nothing wrong with that. It's when it becomes an obsession and when you're sacrificing other parts of your life, particularly relationships, to prove that you're good enough. Because essentially perfectionism, or OCPD, is perfectionism and all the traits you need to make your life perfect, to hold things together. So at work, that'd be someone who rarely delegates and needs to control everything, who has extreme attention to detail, devoted to their tasks at the expense of relationships, believes their way is the only way, believes nothing, but underneath believes nothing they do is ever good enough. And so I'll finish off almost the Wikipedia definition is that OCPD is growing up, and by the time you're an adult, feeling some aspect of you is not good enough, and believing and obsessing about proving that you are good enough, essentially to be loved, by making some aspect of what you do perfect. And so we'll come to neoliberalism, how that plays a role. But in terms of this conversation, we're almost talking about workplace and entrepreneurs and proving themselves worthy by making their project perfect and sacrificing their relationships in the interim. And that's the people that I'm talking about. That's who I was. And that's what I never understood. And I came to understand that no one else understood it either.
So that's interesting. And OCPD, I think this is a slightly confusing acronym because it sounds like OCD, but it's not the same. Can you explain what the difference is?
Not at all. Very, very different. In fact, there's more crossover with Asperger's than there is with OCD. So OCD is something, it's not right. Obsessive compulsive disorder, as we famously know, you need to keep everything regimented and right and everything lined up perfectly. And that's something essentially a lot of people are born with, or not a lot more born with than develop. And you know that it's not right. And you know you wish you could overcome it quite often, and people struggle with it. Whereas OCPD is something that you develop by the time you're an adult, and you have no idea there's anything wrong with the way you think. You just think you're right all the time. You've investigated something thoroughly. How can I not be right? And literally, so often people I'm working with don't understand they've got it at all, and don't realize they've got it. And but you talk to their partners or their children or the people they work with, and they'll tell you this person is a complete perfectionist, and I struggle to relate to them. So yeah, no, they're very different, but yeah, it's unfortunately a very similar group of letters, I suppose.
and what percentage of the population have OCPD then?
Of young people now, they are literally saying it's getting to 2 in 5, like 40% of young people have an aspect of OCPD. And I've got children, and obviously in the investigation of the book, I worked a lot with young people, and that primarily at the moment, I'll go back again now, really. This is where this conversation might fit with coronavirus in some way, because going back to neoliberalism. So in the late 70s, and actually this fitted with my life, is that Margaret Thatcher came into power and Ronald Reagan in America, and they said, we're going to do things differently now. And we're going to we're going to let businesses control the way forward. If we support unconditionally support business to grow as large as possible, they'll employ more people, more things will be made, the economy will be far more successful. And on an individual level, we were literally told, my parents were told, if you work harder, you will be able to buy more things, you will be more successful, and you will be happier. And that is neoliberalism. And that was brought in the 70s, in the late 70s, early 80s, into Britain and in America. And actually, we derided the first people that believed in that. We derided the people that went out and bought a mobile phone first, and put community behind as they went to cities to earn lots of money to buy nice, expensive things. And we called those people yuppies, and we laughed at them. And then eventually over time, we couldn't beat them, which is ironic that that's what it's about. So we all became yuppies, really. We all put earning money and buying more things and believing we would be more successful first above community. And essentially that went along in line with perfectionism becoming a way to prove you were worthy, whereas before it didn't exist before. Whereas, there are other ways, lots of ways, and perfectionism has always been around, but OCPD wasn't identified till the end of the last century. So it's only 25 years ago, really, that it was really identified as a problem. There's always been certain levels of perfectionism, without a doubt. But now it sort of manifested itself through neoliberalism. So then at school became far more about grading. So now, why we have an epidemic of young people now suffering is because school is entirely about being measured, graded, competing to be the best, and you get dropped down a set at school every quarter, or put up a set. Whereas in my time, it might have happened once in your whole schooling. Now it can happen every 3 months, which is not good.
Oh, wow.
And then obviously we have, so social media on two aspects. You've got your friends who now, obviously, if you're not invited to a party, you can see them on snap maps, all going to the party without you. You're sitting there, I don't feel good enough. Here they are all at the party, or there, those two going off together, etc. You can just sit there and see it. And then obviously we're comparing our lives to the richest, potentially and richest and many perfectionists who need their own validation by showing off their success through social media. So I hazard a big guess that a lot of influencers are perfectionists. And then, so what we got, education, social media, and advertising. So that was the final piece in the jigsaw puzzle. The advertising used to be about products. This is a good product, buy this product. And then brands have competed for the last 20, 30 years on branding. And so now they've all, not all, but I've got to say a vast percentage have reached the same conclusion that if you present a brand as being perfect, it can help you look perfect or achieve perfection, then that positioning can't be beaten, and everybody wants it. Every consumer wants to feel we're buying the perfect product, or a product that will make us achieve perfection. And so there's just, for young people growing up into this world, like, we can see outside it, we can see there was sort of a life before in a way, but now everything is driven to achievement and perfection. And so that's why we have an epidemic of young people struggling, because we weren't born to be perfect. We were all born the same. We're all born a bit imperfect. We all love being carefree, playing out when we were young toddlers. And then these outside forces come in and try and tell us all the time that that isn't good enough, or we're not good enough, and we need to achieve more. So I was even going to say, at the very also parenting, that parenting now is about buying the latest products, putting your child in another room, decorating that child's room to the very best, giving them a mobile phone if they're annoying you while you are distracted with your own perfectionism trying to achieve something. And so already, as a young kid, you're already slightly on the back foot. Am I unconditionally loved? Because I might have a nice pink bedroom when I'm like a year old, but I don't get to sleep on my mother's chest or my parents' chest like all day, all night, which is what we actually evolved to do.
Yeah.
Anyway, the sermon of today.
Yeah, and you know something about this because you were in the advertising world originally, weren't you? Isn't that, those were your agencies that you set up?
Yeah, so I ran a couple of big agencies which I managed to sell, and I I wrote a book years ago called Out of Office, which was about moving out of office, and I wrote that in 2012, and because I couldn't, and in hindsight, that was my perfectionism, that I couldn't stand the uncontrollable environment of an office with 100 people in, where I'd be annoyed that 3 of them turned up a minute late for work, and they were also the same 3 that went home a minute early, and it would play on my mind, and the uncontrollability of it. So I just disappeared to a coffee shop. I was doing this from 2000, before there was Wi-Fi, before internet. I'd take my laptop to a Benugo's coffee shop, which the first Benugo's that would appear in Soho, and just sit there and write my stuff on my own. So actually, Out of Office, the book it had the right content, but it was the wrong motivation behind it. It was actually a bigger motivation. It was the uncontrollability of my life that I couldn't handle, and why I had to disappear on my own.
Yeah. No, that's a fascinating idea of how societies contribute to this. It does. I can see that there's a level of perfectionism which everyone is striving for, which we didn't have before. And I remember I was driving with a friend of mine through our old hometown. So he now lives up in New York State, and I live in London. And we were driving through Solihull, where I grew up, and we drove past his old school, and there's all these kids hanging around outside. And he goes like, how do they all look so good? They look like models. And you look at photos of us in the 80s growing up, because I'm in my 50s, and we look so terrible in comparison, just so crushingly unstyled, wearing some cardigan that somebody's knitted for us. I mean, this is, even the good-looking types who actually had some concern. The standards since then have gone up massively, and I think it's quite a difficult thing to stop. So I don't know if I completely see the world the way you do, but I think there's certainly some truth in what you're saying. I don't think there's any kind of sort of evil neoliberal force, but there is an accelerating cause, which is, like you say, you let everyone compare how everyone looks. Everyone starts to want to look better. And then that kind of accelerates like a sort of, good looking, looks based arms race of you've got to be better than the next person. And that was inevitably going to speed up whatever happens. Social media has definitely accelerated it. The question is, how do we put the brakes on that? But I mean, in terms of perfectionism, for anyone who's thinking, well, am I a perfectionist or not? You said like your it probably comes out in your work and your lack of a tolerance for others. Are there any other symptoms that people should be looking for that might indicate they have OCPD?
Yeah, I've got a list here because it's quite a lot, but it's literally all based around everything is a trait about controlling your life. Because having control, you can't achieve perfection if you're letting anyone else have an influence on your life. So as a parent, I've got a couple here, like helping your children do their tasks better, so you can show them, you could do it like this, why not do it like this? Argumentative with your partner, often over parenting issues, because you need to parent your children in the way that you were parented is often the case. Imposing your own high standards on anybody and always distracted by a task or a worry in your head. So one of the big things is missing your own children's childhood, because you might be there in assembly, you might be there at the playing field, but your mind is elsewhere on a task you're trying to do at work. Rigid about rules, quite competitive, procrastination, and at the opposite end, making last-minute decisions. You procrastinate because you want every decision to be the perfect decision. Where are we going on holiday? Well, hold on, I'm just going to check 58 websites and the weather in each of the places and what the
that's
in the airport.
That's really important, and I think a lot of people miss this. I think a lot of procrastination, I know my procrastination is a form of perfectionism. So the reason I'm surrounded by clutter on my desk in front of me here is because I feel like I have to make the perfect decision of what to do with that piece of paper. And also, something I printed out a while ago and wrote a note on, I haven't processed that perfectly yet, so I can't throw it away. And so it causes this stuckness. And I saw that guy give a talk saying, that army guy in America saying, you should make your bed every day, because when you do that, you feel like you're winning, and here's all the great benefits. I even bought his book called Make Your Bed. Can't remember his name now, Colonel or something or other. And I thought, okay, yeah, I'm really going to start making my bed. And I didn't. And even then, I did it for like a couple of days. And the reason why is what's going on in my head is I can't make it perfectly. This is like I can never make these fabrics line up perfectly. And the breakthrough for me, which has actually allowed me to persist to this habit, is make it badly. And that was actually when I tell myself that, whenever I feel that instinct to leave something and not do it at all because I can't do it perfectly, as long as it's not something, I'm not doing brain surgery here or something. If it's a case of making my bed, I tell myself, do it badly. Because actually, my version of badly is actually not that bad anyway, first of all. But also, it means that I'd rather just do it, and then I come back and I find my bed made, even if it's not, ironed perfectly. And that seems to be a breakthrough for me. So I would say anybody who's recognizes they're procrastinating, look at what's behind that. And is it because you're telling yourself you can't do it perfectly? So for instance, social media, I have loads of clients on my Pioneer program and other courses. They're not putting out nearly enough stuff on social media. Partly that's a fear of being visible, but partly it's because they feel like everything has to be this work of art before you hand it to the general public. And what's really working is people being themselves, being imperfect, being authentic, and going, look, I had a thought this morning. I think it might be helpful for some people. And it's not fully formulated and slick. And you just go live and you share it. And whatever your area of expertise is. So I think that procrastination point is really important.
Yeah. And you're right. It holds people back big time. And it's why the first thing is that, as your first thing, you can't make it perfect. Perfectionists have all or nothing thinking. So it is, if I can't make it perfect, I want nothing to do with it. So I just want it to be a routine in my life that I don't have to think about. So you can so a perfect example of that is Mark Zuckerberg's wardrobe, which just has apparently 12 grey t-shirts and 12 pairs of jeans. So he doesn't have to think about it. I have no interest in clothes, and you'll probably find lots of entrepreneurs have no interest in clothes or really money or even food. It's just about success. You can't be perfect at everything, but you need to be perfect at the thing that you feel is going to most prove that you're worthy enough, that you're going to achieve validation. And me wearing the right clothes is never going to do that. But for other people, it will be wearing the right clothes. So it is all or nothing. And I was like that at school. I felt I couldn't do anything. So I did nothing. And I thought I was useless. And my reports say I was useless. But I wasn't. I just wasn't interested, because outside school, and obviously I've got one GCSE, and I worked in a Boots the Chemist for 3 years. It was my first job because that was the level of my life. Because I was useless. Well, it wasn't useless. It was uninterested, and didn't feel anything I could do would be good enough. And then as you say, it is just a case of doing it. And one of the most famous perfectionists of all time, really, is Steve Jobs at Apple, and who wouldn't release a product. And although Apple have bought us amazing products, they could have been more successful earlier. And they took a long time to release a lot of products.
It destroyed his perfectionism. Destroyed his company Next. It was because it was unconstrained when he was thrown out of Apple and he formed Next. Everything was so perfect there. There was no one to put the brakes on that habit, and he ended up with his computer that cost £20,000 to buy. Nobody bought it. Unsurprisingly, he apparently had this factory that was a work of art. He was like an art installation. All the robots are all white and pristine, and the company just tanked. And thankfully for him, he was pulled back into Apple because Apple was not doing well. So he had to tame that. And that's actually, it's perfection. If you tame it, it seems like it can be a positive force, because I think that passion to do something right is a good instinct. And also, I mean, I don't want to kind of play down too much that we were talking before we started recording that I had a partner who I think had something like what you're describing, and her instinct under stress was to work at an unbelievable pace to the point where she would not eat or drink all day, and to the point where she would feel faint. Now, that's clearly not healthy living. However, she got a lot of stuff done. And at that time, back then, she made more money than me. And so, because my instinct under crushing pressure was to collapse, and was a kind of depressive response, and to go, I'm doomed. So you either kind of, when the wave's coming at you, either kind of ride it and go and then surf it like an adrenaline junkie, or you get drowned by it. And I think those two responses to the same thing do have different outcomes. So it definitely has a cost to your health, to your relationships, if you go down the productivity response, but it also has a cost if you go down the collapse response. So, I mean, you have created 2 successful companies that you sold. You've ended up working with Richard Curtis. You've been involved with, you were creative director of Comic Relief, and you've recently been involved in the UN goals and texted. I remember we interviewed you a few years ago. You texted 2 billion people on Earth or something. So, I mean, there is some upside, isn't there? I mean, now you're ameliorating the downsides, but there is an upside.
Yeah. Well, it's difficult because, I would say, I have had success and I have enough money to pay the bills. So, of which nothing would make me happier, really, than I can pay my bills. But, I split up with my wife twice, and we have 4 kids. And if I wasn't lucky that she didn't find someone else and we're back together, I would be living probably in a small flat on my own with my 4 kids, living with my wife, and me seeing them every other weekend. And I potentially wouldn't even be here because it would be so depressing to live with that life. And the sacrifice is huge in perfectionism. Because it's a personality disorder that you often don't know you have, and you don't know how destroying you are to your relationships. You're just unaware, and so it's hard at the time. And that you'll have lots of people who might listen to this who are not in important relationships and see perfectionism as their route to success. And you're right, it can be a route to success. Although there's lots of research now to show if you spend excessive hours working on something, you're being extremely detrimental to the product, let alone to your own capacity to work productively on it. But now, being older, having more of a family life, realizing how important family is, I struggle to think. I would prefer to help people overcome perfectionism so that you could make it a choice rather than an obsession. And as you said, we live in this world now, and that's where coronavirus potentially fits into this conversation, because before you could imagine the end of the world more than you could imagine the end of capitalism or neoliberalism, because it's here. What else is there? But now, obviously, there's shoots of people shouting, we don't want celebrities earning a fortune anymore. We don't want multi-billionaire business people. We don't want multi-billionaire footballers. The people that have been our icons of success for the last 40 years are the first people that are getting sort of publicly knocked down during this period. So it will, and no doubt, if we come out of it without too much sort of bad happening, then we'll return to normal and everyone will be at Westfield shopping centre within 10 minutes. But there's a potential here that actually maybe, at least there'll be a new way of for quite a lot of people looking at life and don't want to be so competitive and don't want to be so judgmental and don't want rich people to be the icons that we sort of setting out to try to sort of be the same as, really, to replicate.
I think there's some truth in that. And I think, we're seeing, like, who gives a crap about influencers right now, right? People are not suddenly getting the latest Instagram star on TV to interview. They're interviewing doctors and scientists because that's what we want to know. And we're interviewing normal NHS workers and we're applauding them every Thursday evening. So it has reset that focus. And I think people are also appreciating things that they've lost and appreciating, relationships more and how to maintain those when we're in lockdown. So it has kind of reset things in a way that could be very positive. I'm doubtful we'll see the end of capitalism myself, and not even entirely convinced that's a good thing. I certainly do believe in ameliorating and limiting the damage it can do. But yeah,
I think what we will do is what they call it, community capitalism. That brands will have to do good as part of their commercial public offering, and not just in the CSR or HR departments. You will, we've talked about it for years, but the backlash now, Virgin are getting substantial backlash, Wetherspoons are getting substantial backlash, and the companies that are doing good by their staff publicly and by their customers are getting a lot of positivity. And so that would be probably the best realistic thing that would come out of this in terms of positive impact on capitalism. That actually part of your business model needs to include the good. Where is the good part of this product?
Yeah, no, and I agree. And I think what I'm advising my clients at the moment is that if you can do something that is an act of generosity that just helps people, yes, there are things you can still sell and you should still have a kind of business strategy because you need to make a living. But at the same time, there's an opportunity for you to help more people, to do something for free, to do live videos, to run free courses, as I just did with 1,000 people, to run a Facebook group, to get people together, whatever it is, do some art initiative even that helps people. And people who do that as a genuine act of generosity will be remembered. And those are the people we are going to trust and want to give our money to if we're going to buy something in future. Like the people in my industry, which you might find this a nauseating phrase, but it was vaguely called the expert industry. I remember the people who actually changed tack and said, how can I help you? And versus those that just carried on with running the same Facebook ads they set up 2 weeks ago, with no change in tone and no addressing of what's going on and where people are. So I think, I think that it is an interesting time, and it will change things. I mean, I've always thought life could end at any moment anyway, because that's been made apparent to me throughout my life. But having lost my father when I was 6 months old, so I was always kind of prepared for life to end as we know it. It's been less shocking for me than for some people as a result. And also I work online, so it makes less difference to my work. But I think we're going to see, it's going to be interesting to see what the world looks like. And I think it won't be quite the same afterwards, hopefully in a good way. But so before we finish though, if people are realizing, okay, they have something going on with perfectionism, it looks like maybe they do have OCPD, what can we do about it?
Well, really, and what you can't do is like with perfectionists, the people the way people have tried to solve it for their friend or for their pupil at school is say, "I'll get on with it. That's good enough," and that is literally like telling someone who's depressed to cheer up. It has no impact, and it's probably negative, and they're not listening to you, and they don't believe you because the impossibility of it is, for me, for instance, as an instance, was would my dad have thought what I'm doing is brilliant and perfect? Would he have said, well done, in my own head? Not even asking, he wouldn't even think about it. So let alone some vague acquaintance telling me, oh, that's a brilliant piece of work. No, it's not. I know my dad wouldn't think that was brilliant. And so it's that sort of impossibility that's playing in your head. So really, in the book is like a 12-step guide, because it's the same as overcoming any other obsession or addiction, really. It's my version of the AA 12-step guide. And so number one really is understanding what made you feel not good enough. And it can be anything. And divorce or splitting up parents while you're young is what is the biggest individual cause that can be identified, because young children can, in some mistaken way, blame themselves or think, if I become perfect, then I can put it all back together again. And actually, a lot of, in fact, I think it's actually a majority, over 50% of British female athletes who've won medals at Olympics come from homes where their parents have split up when they were young. And those as 3-year-old girls have gone out and set out to prove that they can be good enough and make this all good again. So that's the biggest individual cause, but it can be anything. Like mine was my dad following Margaret Thatcher and saying, come on, you need to work harder, and judging me by his high standard and not saying well done and not cuddling me, because that's not what dads did then. So I felt like all the time I had to prove myself. But it could be at school, it could be relationships. That's why, as we said earlier, all the causes earlier, already not being on the back foot as a very small child, and then you see all this competitive, judgmental world. It's really hard to stay, centered and feel good enough about yourself. With our own sort of family, when we're our own kids, we sort of tried to develop the kitchen lounge into like this completely non-judgmental place where we could all laugh with each other and at each other, sort of a break, because even the bedrooms are not a break because your mobile phone's in there and you can see the outside world all the time. So we try to have this moment and a break, and that seems to have helped. But it's tough. So, I've put this 12-step guide, and it is, number one is the big one, really. Take the time to understand what perfectionism actually is, and OCPD, which we've done through this. And then try to understand what may have caused your perfectionism. Discuss the experiences that may have caused your perfectionism and the traits you want to change with the help of a trusted friend, partner, counselor, or a sponsor. Very similar to AA. And that's, it's the same if you saw, someone obsessed with gambling or shopping or drugs or alcohol, you wouldn't just say, stop, come on, carry on. And it's a similar level to that.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point. So, it sounds like if we can somehow, the most important thing in a way is that if you get a chink of light and just begin to realize that maybe, the problems that seem to be going on around you in your relationships and maybe in your health and so on, maybe this is an indication that something is wrong, and that maybe the way your parents, what happened that instilled that was not the best possible, most healthy parenting. If you can just get a chink of light, because as you say, thinking of the perfectionist person I was in a relationship with, I think she very much had the intention of parenting any child she had in exactly the same way. And I could see that scared me even back then. So, and
particularly perfectionist believes this, to bring up your children to be better versions of yourself, which is a nightmare. The one little tip I'd say on a day-to-day basis in terms of managing, if you realize this and you think, some of these problems could be me, I'll think about it, is just to put the person you're with first in front of anything else, in front of distraction. And the distraction is the main thing. Oh, I'm doing this later. How's that going to go? What am I going to wear? How am I going to do it? Or I've got this big project. Just and I used to literally come home, look at my mobile phone outside the front door before I opened the front door, just to check it off, done it, park it, and come in. And then everyone who's with me is the most important thing. So put the person you're with first, and if that became a habit, then that makes a huge difference.
That's great. I really like that idea. So that's something practical people can do.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, thanks so much. Where can people get your book, Less Perfect, More Happy? Did I get that right?
Yeah.
I got it perfect.
We got it. So at some good bookshops, not W.H. Smith travel ones like yours will be, but and on Amazon. And I actually have a website as well, Less Perfect, More Happy website, where you can buy it direct from me on there. I had fun. I thought you were going to ask me. I've managed to get some good PR. So I was on Radio 5 and the Daily Mail on the same day. And Amazon, you have a system where you can tell them you're going to get PR. So I said, I'm going to get PR. Here's the proof. And then they didn't order any more books. So it sold out like within 1 minute of the Daily Mail.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, I'm not their biggest fan.
Okay, that's interesting.
You can buy it on Amazon and at lessperfectmorehappy.com.
And if people want to find out about you, Chris, is there a website or should they check you out on social media?
Facebook is the only one I really stick on, and I'm just there as Chris Ward. Probably come across me, Twitter, Chris Ward author, but I that's one of my things. Perfectionists often trolls. What we call trolls can be perfectionists because once you do something, you feel you've got to own it and you've got to be right. And now I can see it. It's a place I don't want to be, really. So I'm trying to steer clear. But yeah, I'm on Facebook and then lessperfectmorehappy.com.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks, Chris. That's been really interesting.
Oh, brilliant. No, it's good.